Hey there, listener. I know you're dying to get to today's juicy episode, but real quick, we wanted to tell you something special. If you hadn't heard, we are coming out with an actual play Dungeons and Dragons show. It's going to be called Pact and Boon, and if you listen to the end of today's episode, you can actually hear the first part of episode 1. Now, if you want to make sure you don't miss the launch of this new show, go to sessionzerostudios.com/guild and sign up to join our free community where we'll announce all of these things. But again, if you listen to today's episode all the way to the end, you'll hear a snippet from the first part of the first episode and tell us what you think. But in the meantime, let's get back to today's show. Welcome back to How to Be a Better DM. I'm your mastermind today, Justin Lewis, and you're here with me to learn how to tell better stories for yourselves and your friends as you DM sessions of Dungeons and Dragons 5e. How to Be a Better DM is presented to you by Session Zero Studios, our new podcast network, if you didn't hear. It's filled with D&D podcasts and other shows to sate your deepening hunger. I'm excited for today's show because it's actually something that I've been working on to improve personally. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later in today's show, but I'm really excited to get into the show. Before we do, I don't know who needs to hear this. It's actually probably you, the DM listener that I'm actually currently pointing at. You can't see me, but I am. You need to hear this. You are doing wonderfully. You might think that you aren't a great DM, or maybe you have had a session recently that was less than encouraging, but know that you are doing well. First of all, most players could never do as well as you are doing as a DM. And second of all, being a DM is hard, and it is a skill that requires practice. You're doing splendidly, so don't give up. Now, for the rest of you, I hope that wasn't too sappy, because today we're actually going to talk about doing a D&D heist one-shot. And before we talk about heists, I want to take a moment and talk about why you would even consider doing a one-shot. Back on episode 82, the link is in the description, we talked about 10 reasons why you should do one-shots. And let me just summarize one of those points and also explain why this particular topic appeals to me. You see, with one-shots, you can try new mechanics and new scenarios that might be intimidating to pull off for your actual campaign. Doing one-shots challenges you. Now, the next question is, why should you do a heist one-shot? Well, the first answer is that it's fun. Think about all the heist movies you've ever seen. There's The Italian Job, Ocean's 11, 12, 13, however many numbers there are. Army of Thieves, which if you've seen, then in our upcoming live play show, Calignos, the character played by Tanner Wayland, our co-host on this podcast, that character, Wolfgar, resembles the main character of Army of Thieves, which is very delightful, and it's actually super fun. But the list of heist movies and shows and stuff is endless, and all of them are tremendously fun. The second reason that I think you should do a heist one-shot is that I think a heist, more than other types of one-shots, is somewhat more technically challenging. Let me explain. In order to make any particular one-shot as good as it can be, there requires a level of believability, right? You have to strike this level of believability, but also strike a balance with difficulty. If the crown jewel of Tethrez Rembadot is only moderately difficult to steal, then your party will likely think that the one-shot was more of a joke than an actual challenge. To that end, the thing that the party is trying to heist has a perceived value proportional to the difficulty of stealing that object. That means if the party is to believe the value of the target, then the defenses protecting that target need to be difficult and also believable. Also, the party will want a sense of accomplishment, so make it hard enough that they feel good about themselves afterwards. So the first question you need to ask when doing any one-shot is whether or not it will be canon in your campaign or not. And the second question is whether or not your players will create new characters. And these are generally two separate questions, but they can be intertwined. For example, in my current campaign, I am planning an extra special one shot for my players. Now, cue the alarm bells. If you are listening to this and you are one of the players in my current campaign, stop listening. This is a huge spoiler. This is going to ruin the whole one shot, so stop listening. Okay, you can turn the alarms off. In my campaign, the BBEG is named Dreamtaker, and he was a very powerful fey creature who was essentially split into pieces in order to be stopped. But now the pieces of Dreamtaker are all like magic items, and that all happened in the past. So in my current campaign, the party has actually fought against Dreamtaker here and there, and actually unwittingly helped him refine some of these magical artifacts, right? And he's almost nearly complete. And one of the characters was fully possessed by him and now is an NPC that works for him, okay? So I'm planning this heist one shot where somewhere else in the universe, another group of mercenaries has been hired unknowingly to steal an artifact. And unbeknownst to those characters, that artifact is actually a piece of Dreamtaker. I'm whispering a little bit because I don't want my wife to hear, because she actually is in the campaign. This one shot is still going to be canon in the universe, but it's going to take place far away from the main plot line and with totally different characters. And I'm going to use this one shot to sort of explain why Dreamtaker later on is going to show up fully assembled with his piece without just telling my players that it happened, right? It's going to be kind of a fun way of exposing it or expositioning it, I guess is the term, to my players. When you do your heist one shots or your one shots in general, ask yourself whether it will be just a non canon fun experience or if it's going to be salient to the main plot. And the advantage of making it non canon is that anything that happens doesn't really have to make sense in the grand scheme of things. You can be a little bit more loose and have more fun with how you do certain things. But on the flip side, one of the advantages of making your one shots canon is that your players will take things more seriously and they'll come to the one shot with a certain sense of gravitas. So once you've made your choice, you can move on to this next consideration, which is whether or not to make the one shot an ensemble one shot. And let me explain what I mean by that. An ensemble is, simply put, a group where everyone in the group has a unique and specific role. This plays very well into the heist theme because generally, in a heist, you want as few people as possible, but you still want every job taken care of. And you often need the best at doing any particular job. You need the best person to do that. So think about all your favorite heist type movies or shows. And one of the best examples that I can think of in this case is called Leverage. It's a show about a group of people who used to be thieves, but they all kind of collectively decided to use their talents to help people in need. It's a fun show and it shows off the idea of the ensemble beautifully. There are 5 characters in the group, and each character has a specific job. There's the mastermind, the grifter, the acrobat, the techie, and the muscle. So why do I bring this up? In your heist, you'll need to consider how the ensemble will be created. Even if you don't help create it actively, it will be created. For example, let's say you decide to have your party keep their same characters. Each member of the party will find a part to play, something that they can do. And most often, this will mean that the party will sort of split up responsibilities during the planning phase of the heist. And this is a good thing because it should actually help you in the planning phase that you're going to do. What I mean by that is that you'll likely match the challenges of the heist to your party. You'll create opportunities for each member to feel like they are the only person that can handle that particular obstacle. Conversely, you'll likely put in some roadblocks that seem party specific that they'll have to think their way out of. If you decide to have your party make new characters, it might be fun in the outset to have them pick roles within the ensemble that you want them to fulfill. That way, they would make their character specific to the role. Some examples of roles that could be filled are mastermind, grifter, con man, techie, the muscle, the impersonator, the getaway driver, depending on your world, the acrobat, the sneak, the safecracker, the demolitions expert, the distraction, the forger, the artificer for building things like replicas or special contraptions, the face. Those are just to name a few. If you want more ideas, just watch any good ensemble show and you'll get a good idea or two. Now that we've talked about the party and the roles they'll be playing in our one-shot, we need to talk about the prize, the target, the booty. As any good thief knows, it doesn't matter what you get, only what you keep. Similarly, why would you want to keep something that doesn't have much value? In order for any heist to make sense, the target must be valuable. Since you are devoting a one-shot to this heist, I would say that the target has to be pretty darn valuable. If you want to turn the one-shot into like a mini campaign, then the target should be even more valuable. Often, you'll likely make your own target, like create it yourself, but you can also choose artifacts from any of the source books that have already been published. And for the rest of this episode, whenever I say the word target, I generally mean the object that your party is trying to steal. As a general rule of thumb, it's generally best not to make the object of the heist a world-ending relic, unless it happens to be part of your overall plot, if the one-shot's going to be campaign canon. I say, when in doubt, just make it a priceless object of monetary value. That way, the only motivations are greed rather than world domination. When making the target, you also want to make it have somewhat of a nice backstory itself, right? In a way, the object of the heist is also a character, and it needs fleshing out. Think about the Pink Panther movies, more so the old ones than the new ones, where the Pink Panther diamond was almost kind of his own character, and it seemed to have its own will and mind. And the Pink Panther itself actually was a character in that series. That's why in the opening credits, it always started with some smooth jazz and then some nice cartoon animations depicting a debonair Pink Panther evading and generally getting the better of Jacques Clouseau. So maybe in your one-shot, you want to make your target have a life of its own. You could even go so far as to make the target sentient, whether it's an object or a person. And adding this sort of complication adds another layer into the story and can make for a more dynamic experience for your players. So after the target, the next big consideration is the person who owns or is in charge of the object of the heist, the target. If the target is a person, a kidnapping, right? Then the owner of the target would be someone in charge of their safety or someone really close to them. And yes, kidnappings technically count as heists. Thinking about the owner of the target is important because all of the planning that's going to happen after this will take into account who the owner is, what resources they have at their disposal. It also incorporates the willingness of the owner to kill to protect whatever the target is. So really flesh out the owner, because when you come to the planning phase, everything after this phase, you'll be in a much better situation. So let's go through a quick example so far. Again, if you are in my current D&D campaign and you're listening, stop listening because I'm going to reveal some pretty heavy spoilers. It's funny, as I say that, as I was recording this, my wife literally was just sitting around the corner and she heard everything I had said up until now. So there's that. Anyways, currently, I'm planning a heist one-shot, right, as I mentioned. My players are going to be creating new characters, but the one-shot is actually going to be canon within the universe of my campaign, right? I've already mentioned this. First, some things you need to know about the setting. I've stolen some of the ideas from Erois, the High Rollers' second campaign. Specifically, the idea of the astral sea, instead of a sea, it being sort of space, right? And other planets are considered planes and so forth, and some planes do also exist, and it's kind of this whole mix-up thing. But because of this, there's essentially magic astral spaceships and such, and there's sort of this part of the universe that has a lot of higher technology than where my players are at the moment. So that's kind of important, just because it makes it so everything that I tell the hereafter is canon. So I'm going to have my party create characters who are essentially a group of thieves for hire, and they will be hired to acquire an object that, unknown to them, is actually a piece of the BBEG. And that part will be a small reveal to my players at the end of the one-shot, and the person who possesses the target is actually a celestial named Hezriel. And I've yet to determine exactly what Hezrael is, but he has been keeping vigilance against the BBEG to prevent the BBEG, Dreamtaker, from rising to power again. I'm going to have Hezrael live on a planet that is maybe a little bit more advanced than we are on Earth in our reality right now. I'm going to have the heist take place in Hezrael's skyscraper, though that's not going to be its name. So with that example, already we have a lot to go off of, right? Because in this case, Hezrael is a celestial, and he has some fortune and power, right? He has a skyscraper. So we can plan some things in the next phase that will make a lot of sense based on those facts. We also know the motivations that Hezrael has for keeping the target object, namely that he wants to prevent an evil being from resurging. And we also know the motivations that the party will have to acquire it, namely they are being paid, and it's going to be kind of a blind situation. You do a job for a guild kind of thing, and you don't know who you're working for, right? And this is the importance of fleshing out the target and the owner of the target. You start to put in place some of these pieces before you actually start to think about the pieces themselves. Now, somewhat tangential to the owner of the target, you'll want to flesh out both the forces that the owner has at their disposal and also any other rival groups that might be competing to acquire the target object. Kind of as a blanket term, we'll call these adversarial forces, right? In every Indiana Jones movie, there are the rival groups, right? The Nazis, the Russians, or whatever. And while it isn't necessarily a heist in the traditional sense, Indy's always on the hunt for knowledge. And frankly, he's always looking to nab, a historical artifact or something like that, stop it from falling into the wrong hands. National Treasure is another great example of a heist with a rival group, right? You have Ben, and then you have, the other group that has a lot more money and stuff like that. Especially in a one-shot. Adding in another rival group can be a good idea because it can keep the plot and therefore the action going. People act differently when they realize that everything they are doing is technically a race with another group or another person or another force, right? They act a little differently. That said, adding in an entire other group does add another layer that you must create. And if this is one of your first one-shots, you can easily choose to forego the competitor group, and that's completely fine. You'll still have lots of fun. So going back to my previous example with my weekly campaign, I don't actually plan on having an adversarial group compete with my party to steal the target object. In fact, I feel that would detract from them being able to fully enjoy the experience of new characters and a new situation. So now that we've gone past adversarial groups that are kind of outside the owner of the target, we should talk about the forces that the owner of the target has to bear. So this is where we go back to my example. Hezrael, he owns a skyscraper, right? He has a fortune. He has the ability to hire people, right? So he's going to have guards. He's going to have minions, you could call them. And that's important because it adds a particular sentient layer to the defenses guarding the artifact that the party is going to try and get. So you need to think about, would the owner of the object employ individuals to counter any attacks? And what skill sets would those individuals have? And adding that into the mix will really help you move farther down the planning phase. So for many people, planning something like this can be quite daunting, right? Let's just get that out in the open. In fact, for me, planning something like this is daunting because compared to other one-shots, like I said, this heist requires technical dungeon master skills. But guess what? You're listening to How to Be a Better DM, where you're going to learn how to do all that technical stuff. So first of all, thank you. Thanks for putting your trust in us, put trust in me, and letting us have the chance to, make or break it, right? We never forget you, whether you're at the gym right now, washing dishes, driving to work, or, out washing your dogs. We appreciate you and wish, we could sit in on all of the games you dungeon master, right? So let's continue with the planning phase, right? The first step of the planning phase, the actual nuts and bolts of the one shot, the first thing you need to figure out is the location of the target object. This means in what universe, where in the universe, where in the realms or on the world is your target object located? And this is very important because stealing the ancient artifact of a hidden Gamuchi tribe is very different from stealing a piece of Dreamtaker from Hezrael Tower within the technologically advanced Pomelin City, right? Two very different heists, but both can be very fun. They're just going to have different details. So think about where your object would be and extrapolate logically from who owns it, what it is, and why people would want it to figure out the best location for your one shot. From there, you can hone in to specifically the building the object is in. For heists, the building always matters, right? Sometimes it's going to be on a specific person, and that's sort of a different scenario altogether. But in heists, generally, you need to sneak in and sneak out or get away fast, right? That's kind of the MO of a heist. And that means that you need to know where all the exits are and where everything important is relative to everything else. So even if you're trying to take the object from a living person, you need to understand where are they going to be and how can we get to them and get away from them without problems. So time and space is very important. So I would say in order of operations, do this. Number one, pick the object, the target. Number two, pick the owner of the target or whoever is currently in possession of it. And number three, create or pick the location of the building the object is stored in. And then four, create a layout of that building or that location. If you're out in the open and it's, a nab and grab of someone or something like that, right? The idea is once you have a map, it will be much easier to let your players plan through the heist themselves, because remember, they're going to have to do some planning as well. With that map, there are some things you want to consider. Noting on a personal copy of your map, right? One that the players will never see. So for example, in a large skyscraper like I'm going to be working on, I'm going to want to note air ducts, how they connect, but also secret passages that wouldn't necessarily be on public government records or things like that. Things that would exist, but my players may not find out about them. And I can choose if and how the party could uncover those, depending on how they plan and what actions they take during the heist and even before the heist. And you can obviously, skip the step if you feel that the building the target object would be in wouldn't have anything like that. Or you can add in other elements, right? If you have a map of a swamp, for example, and in the middle there's a temple that's guarded by a tribe, and your party wants to steal something from that temple, then in the swamp you might want to note, like quicksand pits or dens of wild beasts, random magical surges, things that the players might not know about, but would still be fun to have in the game. So make sure you note that on your map. Obviously, you need to plan for the level of technology that your party is going to deal with. And you've likely already made this decision when you chose the location of the target object, but I want to talk about a couple of considerations while we're at it. First, if the party is going to do a heist in a low-tech area, they're going to likely have access to magic. This is Dungeons and Dragons after all, right? You need to decide if the owner of the target object also has access to magic. And in my opinion, it would be pretty strange if your party could use spells like invisibility, but the person protecting a very important object didn't have access to spells like see invisibility. I would at least make them both on the same footing at the start, though to me it makes a little more sense for the owner of the target object to have a few more resources available, which would force the party to think through the problem rather than just magic their way through. On the other hand, if the party is facing off against a high-tech opponent, then you as the DM will need to worry about things like alarm systems, CCTV security cameras, elevators, and other things like that. You'll also need to make it so simple things like disguise self or minor illusion can't just easily disrupt the whole system. If magic is a thing, then the high technology needs to be able to see through it or circumvent it. I personally think actually that it would be pretty interesting to have a high-tech party go up against a low-tech target owner and discover that for some reason it's just actually more difficult than if they went up against a higher tech level opponent, right? So having chosen a tech level, it should be pretty easy now to start to visualize some of the traps and things that you would naturally put in your heist. The next thing you need to decide on is the vault. Since before this step, you've already made the layout of the building that the heist is going to take place in, knowing what the vault looks like will be easy or easier. For some, it might just be the person who is holding the object and wherever they are, right? And also, for context, when I say vault, I actually just mean the final spot that the party must pass through in order to get to the object, right? The vault could just be a room. It could even be a person if the target is constantly on someone's person, like I said. The idea here is that theoretically, the final stage before target acquisition and escape should be getting through or past the vault. We're going to work backwards a little and then think about the things starting from the end. Is really how we're working here. So combine what you know about the layout of the building with what you know about the resources of the owner of the target. That combination of knowledge should help you be able to think about things like, what sort of protections could this owner afford to purchase, rent, and maintain? That's a very important one. So going back to my example with Hezriel, let's flesh out his vault. We know that the building and the world that the heist is going to take place on is somewhat high-tech. And I've decided that the vault is going to be about 3 or 4 levels underground inside the massive skyscraper. As far as the owner of the object is concerned, Hezriel, the Celestial, he is quite powerful, and he has quite a few resources at his disposal. And he could theoretically have any sort of protection device that I could think of within the limits of these high-tech levels, right? This means that I don't need to limit what I can think in terms of laser alarms, security cameras, things like that, right? He's going to have kind of the works. Hezriel is lawful good, though. So really anything he employs is going to be forthright and not very sneaky. He's not going to have a legion of invisible imps just hanging around. Instead, he would just have strong technology and then a legion of guards on call that could be called upon at a moment's notice. And all of this is going to be fairly obvious once you get in kind of restricted zones of the building, right? You're not going to get into the vault and then a spike trap just appears and kills you all. That's not his MO. So with all of those considerations, I've decided to make the vault basically a suspended room on underground level 3 or 4 of the skyscraper. And the idea is that if something trips a major alarm, then the suspended vault is released and falls along rails to an underground level 10, where many more guards are waiting. And inside this vault is just a very large room with shelves and stands for different artifacts, and none of the artifacts are going to have magical abilities. They're just going to be, rich stuff. And actually, in this case, I don't care if the party steals a little something extra, because having extra money is not going to affect the rest of my campaign. But there will be the main artifact kind of in the center of the vault. And it's going to be very obvious that that's what they're looking for. So let's go back to thinking a little bit more about guards, right? I know we've spent some time thinking about the owner of the object, and we did touch on some of the guards a little bit, but I want to spend some more time fleshing out the guards a little bit more, because I think here it's going to be an important consideration. For example, we need to ask questions like, are the guards actually loyal to the owner, or are they just hired muscle? And would any one guard consider taking a bribe? Could one of the party members, infiltrate the guards and pretend to be one? You got to think of these questions because your players are going to think of these questions. And knowing the answer ahead of time is really going to help you give a well thought out and well delivered response. And those questions can change things dramatically. For example, if a party member can be a guard, that party member would likely need to look for clues on how the guards act and treat each other, and then try to mimic those. So that means you as the DM are going to need to know those same clues. For example, maybe the guards belong to a race of people that have special codes or standards about guarding things. If the party wanted to infiltrate the guards, then they would need to know the rules and requirements dictated by the code of the guards in that case. In this step of the planning process, you'll also need to identify guard spots, how often they change out, and where they patrol. And I know that it's a lot, right? Doing this whole heist D&D one-shot, it's going to be a lot. But if you don't feel like a criminal mastermind yourself after, then, I guess you're not doing it right, because you really are the brains of it all, right? You are the mastermind that's allowing someone else to try and be a mastermind. But anyways, I digress. So make a copy of your map or blueprint of the layout, right? And then drop the posts of the guards where they're going to kind of stand watch, and then where they're going to come and where they're going to go, where they're going to patrol. And you can even go so far as to like make a schedule, right? And doing that will help you add concreteness to your game. And some of you out there might be wanting to just skip some steps in favor of just kind of winging it all when the one shot comes, and that's fine. Different strokes. But in my opinion, with a heist one shot, you want to make sure you're buttoned up really nice, because the party is going to use everything they have, and that will make it pretty difficult to make the game feel real without some planning beforehand. So going back to my example from my campaign, Hezriel is a Celestial, which means he would likely be able to tell if someone is lying. So he wouldn't hire a group of lawless mercenaries, just naturally. Also, since he only has the artifact to prevent the BBEG from rising to power, he would employ guards who believe in the same cause. He would try to recruit guards that truly believe that preventing Dreamtaker from rising to power is a good thing. So it can reasonably be assumed that the guards of Hezriel's tower aren't bribable and won't be corrupted by normal means, right? That we're just going to say that that's a blanket statement. Now, if the party wanted to try and blackmail one of the guards, that might be possible, because every good person has something that they want to protect. And the more you want to protect, the more you have to lose. But I'm going to leave the party to think up that plan of attack. If they do, I'll improvise the backstory of the guard, and away we'll go, and so forth. Next, since Hezriel is in a constant vigilant state against the forces of Dreamtaker, the big bad guy, then it's very likely he's going to keep his guards in tip-top fighting shape. So it's probable that the guards would have advanced weaponry and would prove to be a threat to the party in an all-out fight. So it's very likely that these guards are very dangerous. So to me, this is starting to look a little bit more like the game Mirror's Edge, if any of you have played that, where you can fight some of the adversaries, some of kind of the people, the people with weapons. But if you stay and fight for too long against too many, you're just going to be overrun from their firepower, right? Also, the guards won't just be pushovers or imbeciles. They're going to be smart and resourceful. And because the guards are that good and also that trustworthy, for me, it's safe to assume then that Hezriel would have really high standards. Since he has such high standards, it's very probable since he has such high standards, it's very probable he wouldn't be able to fill the ranks of his guards as fully as he would like. To me, this means that he'll have less guards than I'd originally planned overall, but since each guard is a little bit more capable, I think it'll sort of balance out. Because Hezriel is a Celestial, it's also very likely he would supply the guards with Celestial-type weapons. So we can reasonably imagine them with light rifles, light swords, swords made of light, flashbang grenades, and at least a couple of magic users with healing spells and cleric-type spells. There would likely be also a few guards in there specifically trained on defeating magic users. So through this whole process, I've sort of been just thinking out loud, but you get the general idea. And now we've really fleshed out the ideas behind the guards. And when it comes time to actually make the homebrew guards, like the actual adversaries, the monsters, the enemies, I'm much more ready. So we've got the location, we've got the guards, we've got most everything. But now let's talk about the owner. As you well know, in any good heist movie or show, the owner gets a little suspicious about something that's going on, right? Maybe he sees someone he recognizes or something like that, right? And maybe he doesn't know exactly that it's your party doing something, but I think the owner should definitely think something's starting to get suspicious and therefore start to do something. That might mean that the owner just cycles through the security cameras to see if anything's going on, Or maybe the owner's going to get super paranoid and take the target object to a backup location, foiling all of the plans of the party completely. Thinking in these terms is a great way to make the entire scenario a little bit more dynamic, even if it's just the rote situation that you create. To your players, it will seem like the owner is actively making a decision, which will help them feel like the owner is a real character. This is also where you might consider adding in a mechanic, like a general alert level or something like that. A lot of video games have something like this, but the idea is that with particular checks, specific points in the game, if a PC fails the check, then the general alert level goes up. And the higher the alert level, the more guards there are and the more skittish the guards are, and the owner of the target becomes. With the owner, you could decide that at a certain alert level, they will do one of a few pre-written actions that are going to make the game harder for the PCs, like cycling through the security cameras or just going full paranoia. Remember, though, you do want to provide for the possibility for your party to fail and succeed. Make them feel like there are real consequences to their actions, but don't make it too hard that it's just impossible to win. Another thing you might just decide to do is have the owner take action, one or a few actions at a certain point in the game, regardless of what the party does. This will also make the owner of the target feel real because they're making decisions like a real person would, regardless or independent of the party. Maybe what you might do is set a timer in real life, and then once that timer goes off, the owner does something in the game. Or you could say after a certain amount of time, once the characters are in the vault. Some common actions might include just going to check up on the object routinely, or closing down the building and sending all the non-guard personnel home for the day. Maybe they were just feeling generous in my case, like Hezriel's like, oh, all the employees can go home from the skyscraper, only the guards stay. In my example with Hezriel, actually, I'm somewhat torn between the alert level type mechanic and just having Hezriel do something just by himself. On one hand, the alert level is kind of a really fun idea, but on the other hand, I'm never good at remembering homebrew mechanics like that. And I just usually forget that they're there, which is always, that's actually just a mistake on my part. So I think what I'm going to do is have Hezriel already have something scheduled, right? Have an inspection from like a security expert scheduled for the entire system. So basically at a certain point, this security expert will arrive, and then he or she will walk around the entire building with Hezriel, and obviously, like a grapple of guards, which may make things more difficult for the party. That brings me into another great topic for heists, the complication. So to preface this, let me tell you a couple rules. Rule number 1, no plan survives contact with the enemy. And rule number 2, the enemy gets a vote. These are sort of 2 rules that are variations on the same theme. The idea is that you can spend all day planning until you're blue in the face. You could create the perfect foolproof plan. But then the second you start putting it into action, the free agency of other beings, and honestly, the fate of the universe, is going to muck it all up and introduce variables you did not calculate for. In heist shows and movies, the complication is often the best part of the movie. It's the twist. It adds tension to the plot, and that tension draws us in. It envelops us. So, I would say that you can create complications a number of ways. I think the 2 simplest ways are 1, choosing one complication no matter what, or 2, creating a small random table and rolling on that during the one shot after certain parameters have been met. Let me also note that sometimes the actions of the owner are the complication, if you haven't already figured that out yet. So going back to my example with Hezriel, hopefully you're not bored of this story, and maybe once I'm done with it, I'll kind of walk you through it and kind of release it out for free. But one of the complications might be that the whole security system is down, right? All of the technology is down. So instead of having cameras and lasers, Hezriel has decided to post guards at all the places that would require cameras or lasers. This means that all of the planning the party did to circumvent digital security measures are useless. That said, Hezreel's probably going to have to find some guards that he wouldn't normally buy or hire, which might mean that some guards are open to bribes or things like that. There's lots of possibilities, but that should give you an idea of some of the things that are possible with a complication. And the cool thing about that fact that magic exists in these one-shots is that the complication could be something else random entirely, right? Like maybe one of your party members is a werewolf, and randomly there's a full moon, and now your party has to deal with a party member being a werewolf and somewhat unpredictable, and you sort of make them do certain things. You can really let your imagination go wild when it comes to magic and these complications. I know that I've been talking a lot today, and today's episode is probably going to be a pretty long one. Hopefully, you're still hooked. Hopefully, you're still on the edge of your seat if you're sitting down or whatnot. And hopefully, I'm not boring you. Hopefully. Regardless, in any case, I'm almost done, so just stick with me. We're going to get through it. It's going to be awesome. The last thing that you may or may not want to plan is stuff in your story in case there is a getaway chase scene. Now, obviously, this portion is optional depending on how much time you have with your players for the one-shot. If one of your players is a getaway driver, though, it's much less optional, and you should definitely plan for this, right? They chose a role specific to this. You need to put it in there. And if that is the case, then make sure they also have other skills that are worthwhile in the game, so that way they aren't just waiting the entire session until it gets to their part and then they're going whiz-banging, right? The first thing, as always, is to plan the layout of the escape. Basically, know where the driver's going to go. You don't necessarily need to know the exact route or the exact layout, but if you wanted to, you could get that granular. You just essentially need to know what is their end destination, right? What is considered safe? What's home base, maybe even. You also need to keep in mind the terrain. A chase scene through a city is very different than through abandoned catacombs. Two very different situations with different complications. You can also spend some time working on the vehicle of escape. If the vehicle is just the party running, then you're done. Otherwise, you might want to put some thought into it to make it a little bit more fun, right? If someone is driving a wagon, you might say that the wagon has been souped up a little bit to be a little faster, or maybe it has mounted crossbows on the back for the other party members to shoot at and kind of get in on the action. However you soup up the getaway vehicle, make sure the pursuing vehicles can still stand a match for it. So if you do have a souped up wagon, then maybe flying machines or like mini dragons are what are chasing the party. However cool the party makes their getaway vehicle, it should still be a challenge to get away. You'll also want to come up with a fair bit of chase complications, as you naturally would for any individual chase. And in this case, one of the worst chase complications could be that one of the party members falls out or off of the getaway vehicle and gets caught, which could actually make for some really fun role-playing later, or perhaps even another heist/jailbreak one-shot, which could be amazing, right? Super fun. So there you have it. You've written a D&D heist one-shot, mostly. Now, the only thing left is to actually play the one-shot. And let me tell you, that's also a very fun part because it involves one extra step. Because you've done all the work, we won't go through playing the entire one-shot, but that said, heist one-shots have a little bit more involved beginning than other one-shots. They have kind of an extra step because unless you're a merciful DM and you just decide to hand your party a plan of attack, your party needs to do the planning to pull off the heist. They need to kind of plan their entrance, their acquisition, their escape, all of the things. And this planning phase might actually be a whole separate session. It's probably going to be preferable that way because you don't necessarily know how long it's going to take them. But if you can squeeze it in, then the first thing you want to do in the session is to help them get a plan in place. And the way I see it, the planning phase for the players is going to likely include three facets: research, plan making, resource gathering. So let's talk about research first. Unless you decide to be a benevolent DM, your players won't have very much knowledge of the target location. And this is pretty standard when it comes to heist shows. Usually, the mastermind or whatever just starts with an idea, right? Let's steal XYZ. And then the party spends a good deal amount of time getting information so that way they can make their plan. And in my opinion, there are a few ways that your party can get information, right? Number one, they could use informants. the party could rely on informants to tell them important aspects of the location where the target is stored. There's an inherent risk, though, in using an informant, right? If the informant is not loyal, then this naturally leads to the party being double crossed, right? An excellent mid heist complication, actually. An informant's going to inform anyone. On the other hand, using an informant could grant the party special information that they would never get otherwise. An informant can be willing or unwilling, and what that means is, in one case, willing, they know that they're giving up information, and in another case, they are either doing it under duress or have been fooled into a false sense of security. Both of them have their pros and cons. And if the party wants to try and talk to an informant, ask them specifically what type of informant they want to reach out to and how they would get the informant to talk. Common examples are guards, staff, employees, criminal enforcements, passerbys that can get access because they aren't criminals. The list goes on, right? Number 2 is staking out the location. One of the simplest ways to get information about the target location is simply to watch and observe the location, learning whatever you can. If your players choose this option, either skip over it really fast because it's just literally watching and waiting, or make it so there is an actual threat of being discovered. Maybe the head of security ends up having lunch at the restaurant where most of the party's sitting. Or maybe their stakeout vehicle's getting towed or something like that. Just make it interesting or skip over it with a couple checks and get to the good stuff. Only spend time on what's interesting. Number 3, a minor heist. Another way the crew can go about researching and obtaining information for the heist is with a smaller, lower risk heist. And this is actually what I'm making some provisions for in my game with Hezreel's Tower. I figure that the party is going to need the layout of the building, so if they wanted to, and if they think of it, they can decide to sneak into City Hall, into the records department, and just steal a copy of the blueprints of the building. Obviously, this isn't the full heist, so it's not going to be as in-depth, and I probably will wing a lot of it. But the idea is that your party can go somewhere and steal or purchase, I guess, if you want to be boring, some valuable information about the location of the heist or some of its defenses. There are likely a few other ways that the party could do research, but you get the general idea, and at least you have some ideas to go off of right now. Because a lot of this is going to be pretty boring, you could just have your party do all of this stuff before the actual session of the one shot. Basically just send texts or emails and such, and have your party really make roles by themselves and then just supply them with the information they need, or tell them that they weren't able to get the information based on their role, right? You don't necessarily need to have this be an entire session, so just remember that. The next phase of your player's planning phase is the actual planning itself. A heist is a complicated thing with lots of moving parts. So you're going to want to give your players some time to make a plan and discuss and see if they can put it all together. You might consider giving them a time limit in real life to make it a little more interesting and challenging, or you could just let them go at it and see how much time they take. Because the planning phase could be drawn out and possibly take a really long time, I wouldn't recommend doing it on the same day of the actual one shot. People could get burnt out. Try doing it on a separate day or over text or email, like I said. That way, when the one shot comes, you get all the time to mess with the party, right? That's always fun. But also, they get all the time to have fun and kind of look like really cool thieves or criminals, right? The third phase of the planning phase for your players, and this is really an optional phase, is the resource gathering phase. We've all seen these on shows, right? There's like a montage of them getting parts or things like that. And naturally, at this point, your players will have hatched a plan. And if you choose to do the resource gathering phase, you're just simply going to tell your players that they have a certain amount of money, and with that money, they can acquire certain items that may be useful to them in the heist. For example, your group might want a ring of invisibility for one of its members, or maybe like an anti-magic gun. Each of those items are going to cost different amounts, obviously. But if your party wants them, they can go buy them, or they could try and attain them some other way. If they want to steal them or if they want to barter for them, that's okay, right? You can let them do that. But if they do choose to steal such things, remember there are consequences for everything. So if my party wanted to steal an item for a heist, I'd fulfill that request with a simple check. If they make it, whatever, right? But then definitely I'm going to have the people they stole from show up during the heist, and mess everything up, because that is a wonderful complication that ties in a little bit of backstory. And remember, everything has consequences. After resource gathering, you're all set to play the game. Whether you intend to pull off a serious one-shot like Ocean's 11, or one that's a little more lighthearted like Logan Lucky, I'm here for it. I love heists and ensemble shows. I love how different roles kind of mix and match and cooperate to make this really cool team. And I would love to hear how your D&D heist one-shot goes. Hopefully with these tips and these frameworks, you are more willing to try creating a session like this. I know it's somewhat daunting. It's daunting for me. But regardless, my hope is that together, you and I have been able to help you be a better DM. Thank you for listening to today's show. As always, I really appreciate your massive support. And yes, I know you're shaking your head like, all I do is listen to his podcast. No, if you listened this far or to any episode so far, you've been a massive support. And I just want to say thank you, right? If you do want to support us more, though, just leave a rating and review, which is phenomenal. It's so far, and it's going to help us be found by other prospective DMs. But also make sure to follow us on Instagram at How to Be a Better DM and on TikTok at Session Zero Studios to get even more tips, things that I don't share here on the podcast. Finally, make sure you're taking care of yourself and your loved ones. Sometimes it's hard out there, and make sure that you have a little bit of fun every single day, right? Because that's important too. So I've been your host, Justin Lewis, and we'll be back next week for another amazing episode. Until then, my friends, let's roll initiative. Thank you for listening to today's show. We really appreciate your support and your patronage. We have a few more announcements to go over. First, tired of being alone? Are you tired of not having any of your players understand you? Are you tired of never truly belonging? Well, you're in luck. All you need to do is join the Guild. The Guild is a unique and exclusive experience that is only open to Dungeon Masters. It is a full community focused on helping ease your DMing burdens. Want to meet other DMs? Join the Guild. Want to discuss your homebrew ideas with people who would appreciate it instead of just telling your cat? Join the Guild. Want to find a place where all your wildest dreams will come true? Join the Guild. Go to monsters.rent/guild and sign up today for free. Wait, that can't be right. Chuck, can you check this again? Is this supposed to be... What? Oh, they're serious? It's free? Oh, okay. All right. Yes, go to monsters.rent/subscribe/guild and sign up today for free, even though they are crazy for giving this away for free. Common side effects may include burping, sneezing, laughing, breathing, hearing, listening, tasting, farting, creating sarcasm, puns, and in extreme cases, explosive diarrhea. That's all the announcements we have today. Again, thank you so much for everything you do for us. You make this show possible. Like we said before, we'll be back next week with another great episode, and until then, let's go ahead and roll initiative.